You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 155. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my dear friend. Welcome to today's podcast. I'm thrilled to have you here with me today. Thank you for joining. This is an episode that I am dedicating to my mom lawyers. Yes, you know who you are. You are the woman who is balancing her life, possibly quite precariously, between your role as a parent at home and your role as a lawyer at work. And I'm recording this episode because Mother's Day is coming up. I wanted to acknowledge and celebrate you, and I also wanted to offer something of value, a gift to you. So the first gift that I think I can offer is simply to acknowledge you and the different roles that you are playing at any given point in your day to day. As a mother, I see you. I see all the work you're doing behind the scenes, the meal planning, the lunch preparation, helping your kids to grow and evolve, dressing them if they're super young, making sure they don't fall off the high toys at the playground, the jungle gym structures. It's been a while since I've been to a playground, but I remember watching my kids and making sure they weren't falling off. And it changes. If your kids are a little bit older like mine, you might be helping them navigate some challenges at school, challenges with their friends at school, helping them shop for clothes, do their homework. And if your kids are even older than mine, I can only imagine what it is that you are doing in your role as mother. Now, at the same time, you've got your professional work. These are the expectations, the challenges, the problems that you're solving at work for your colleagues, for your clients. You are showing up in your office where you've got meetings, you've got court appearances, and you are doing both of these in tandem. And I wanted to celebrate and acknowledge you for those roles that you are playing. You are doing a fabulous job. You are. You may not have heard it for some time. You may not have people who tell you this on the regular, but I want to tell it to you now, and I want you to hear this. And if you need to come back to this episode, just play this one part. You are doing a fabulous job. It really is tough. There are a lot of moving pieces, and you're doing a fabulous job of keeping all of those pieces moving in the right direction. Now, it doesn't matter. You might be thinking, but Paula, I didn't pick my kid up from school yesterday on time. Or you might be thinking, yeah, but I ordered takeout. Or you might be thinking, my house is a mess, or I still haven't responded to that client email. I hear you. I see you, and you're still amazing, and you're doing a wonderful job. So I celebrate you this Mother's Day. I celebrate you every day. I see you, and you're amazing. I work with a number of lawyer moms. You make up a large percentage, actually, of the lawyers that I work with. I also work with a number of lawyer dads. And for all of you, there is this wonderful mix of things that you love in your life. You love your children, you love your work. And the question is how to balance all of those things together. So what I would love for us to focus on today is how to do that in a way that may feel more balanced and feel more peaceful to you. So you are probably familiar with this idea of work-life balance and the idea that it's something that is really hard to attain. And what that can mean on the day-to-day is that you may feel quite conflicted in terms of your duties or roles as a parent and your duties and roles at work, feelings like having stress. You might feel torn between two different priorities. You might feel a lot of mom guilt if you're at work and your kids are doing something and you're missing it. If you're missing first steps, first words, you're missing an event at school, you're missing a birthday party. You may feel that sense of mom guilt. You might also feel guilt at the office. You are in an environment perhaps where everyone around you seems to be there 24/7 and you're trying to keep up. But the reality is you leave at 5 every day to go get your kid from daycare. Maybe it's even earlier than that. And so you might find that you feel guilty because you're not pulling your weight at the office or contributing as much as the other players on your team, or you're not there as often as you'd like to be. So these are real challenges. These are real conflicts. And so the question is how we can approach them in a way that gives you more peace and gives you a feeling of having more control. Now, questions that come up with lawyers that I work with as well sometimes are questions that happen at that very early stage when you're even planning, right? That can be really tough when you're trying to start a family or add to your family and you're finding that that in itself is really challenging for whatever reason. That may be where you find yourself right now. And maybe the kids are not there yet and you're trying to create space for them. Or you might find that you have your family and you've got opportunities at work. So maybe your kids have reached a certain age where they're a little bit more self-sufficient. You're not quite in the weeds of the newborn baby, which if you've had that experience, which if you're listening, I'm guessing you may already have or you likely have, you know what it's like to be in the weeds. You know what it's like to not be able to rely on a full night of sleep. So you might be out of that stage, but your kids are still at a stage where they need you and you are making decisions about your professional life, right? Do you go ahead and take that huge opportunity as partner or as judge or as some role that is going to require a lot of you? Is it the right time for you? Or are you going to pace yourself a little bit? You're maybe still going to pursue that, but maybe on a different timeline. So there's all these different ways that this can show up in your practice, that can show up at home. And the idea today, again, is to help you find some peace. Now, the reason that I think the work-life balance conflict is so present is because you've essentially stepped into two core identities and you're trying to live them out at once. And when you think of a core identity, what I would invite you to think about is the descriptors that you use that start with an I am statement. So character traits might be I am persistent. I am determined. I am committed to fairness. I am a person who cares. I am something. So that is an identity statement versus an I have, right? Or like I have a job. I have a law degree. I have a tendency to get upset when I see people fighting. So there may be an I am versus an I have. Now, in the I am category for being a lawyer, of course, you may be someone who identifies really strongly as I am a lawyer, right? It is a central part of who you are as a person and as a mother as well. When you step into that role, you are now a mother. It is an I am identity shift. You might notice that your children's friends' parents, for example, refer to you as so-and-so's mom, right? You almost lose your first name and you become the name of your child's mother, which is quite sweet. Again, it's an identity shift. So you're holding these two core identities. I am a mother. I am a lawyer. And these are both identities that you really care about. You care about the role that you play at work, and you really care about the role that you play as a mother. And what this can create is stress. There is a wonderful American health psychologist, Kelly McGonigal, who has studied stress. She's written an incredible book called The Upside of Stress, and she has a corresponding TED Talk. And in her book, she defines stress as what happens when two things that you care about are in conflict. So what I love about this definition is that I think stress sometimes is a word that we use that describes a very negative experience. And yet you can flip that around and say, actually, these are two things I highly value, and those values are coming into conflict, and that is the source of the stress. So when you see your role as mother and your role as lawyer as being in conflict with each other, that can lead to a feeling of stress. Now, the purpose of today's episode isn't so much to help you figure out how to plan your life to avoid stress and have the perfect setup. What I'm really focused on today is the who you are versus how you're doing things. So to help you find your way to the who versus the how, I have 4 different strategies that I would love to offer to you today. Now, the first strategy is to think about who you want to be in each of the roles that you have chosen for yourself. This is the idea of you as lawyer and you as mom. And as I was preparing for today's episode, I was thinking about how it's almost as though you have a superhero costume, right? If we think back to Superman, for example, I always think of him as the iconic superhero, and he had his Superman suit. And when he wasn't wearing that suit, he was this ordinary guy, Clark Kent. And when he wanted to become Superman, I think he would go into a phone booth. At least that's my memory of it. I might be wrong about that. So he'd be ordinary guy, goes into the phone booth. He comes out the extraordinary Superman. And what I would offer to you is that you too have a superhero costume, but you actually have 2. You've got your superhero costume that you wear when you go to the office. So you might think of your favorite suit or whatever it is that you wear when you're dressing up at work, a day that you've got an important client meeting or a court appearance. There's you in that version. There's you in your superhero costume. And then there's also you at home, right? And the superhero costume you wear at home, if you're anything like me, is definitely not a suit. It's probably something a little bit comfortable, something that isn't necessarily white because you're probably going to get something spilled on you. So you've got these 2 different superhero costumes. And unlike Clark Kent, who gets to go and be an ordinary guy when he switches out of his Superman costume, he probably gets to sleep when he wants to and go to the movies when he wants to. Your superhero costume is one that your 2 are ones that you trade off interchangeably. So you're either in superhuman lawyer mode or you're in superhuman mom mode, and you never really get to take a break, right? So I invite you to think about how you've got these costumes almost, or you've got these identities, and you're stepping back and forth into those 2 identities. And that is a lot, right? We really want to celebrate and acknowledge you for that. And I hope that the visual of you in your superhuman suit, whether you're at the office or at work, is one that helps you appreciate just how much you're doing, appreciate the significance of the role that you play. So for you, what I would invite you to think about doing when you're thinking about how you've got these 2 different identities. Now, you may have more identities. You may be a daughter, a sister, a friend, all sorts of different potential identities. And so you might do this exercise for those as well. But today we're focused on you as a lawyer and you as a mom. And so I invite you to ask yourself in each of those roles, what is most important to you? This isn't what is most important to society or your boss or your colleagues. It's you. I really invite you to do this exercise based on your own internal values. So when it comes to lawyer, for example, and I invite you to pick 3. I mean, you can pick more than that, but I find 3 is a nice number. It gives you some definition without being overwhelming. So who do you want to be as a lawyer, right? You might think of characteristics that you want to possess. You want to be professional. Maybe you want to be fierce. You are an advocate, perhaps, problem solver, change maker, connector. Maybe you're really good at helping others around you connect with each other. Maybe you connect really well with them. Maybe you're able to explain things to your clients in a way that they understand. You may be really determined. You never give up. You may be skillful. You might have an ability to draft contracts. You may have really highly specialized knowledge. You may be a tax lawyer or a similar lawyer who has a very narrow and defined skill set that not very many people have. You may see yourself as a leader. So here, what I'd invite you to think about is the characteristics that you embody as a lawyer, and to give yourself a guideline. Give yourself guidance by choosing 3. If you need to choose more, but at least 3 guiding principles that define who you are in that role. Now, I would love for you to do that same exercise when it comes to you in your role as a mother. So again, think about who you want to be in relation to your children. So present is one of the words that comes to mind for me. Patient. Maybe you want to be a guide. You see yourself as leading your children through life. You want to be loving. Regardless of what they do, you want to be able to find it in you to see how much you love them. You may want to be compassionate when they come to you with their challenges. You may want to be an advocate. You may want to be advocating on behalf of your children, whether it is at school, whether it is at a hospital, whether it's at a sports team, whether you feel they've been wronged in some way. You may want to be their teacher. You might be showing them the way. You may also think of how you want to be full of grace, right? When I think about parenting and wanting to be able to be in a state of allowing, a state of maintaining a certain level of calm. So you get to decide when you pick your description as lawyer, as mother, define what those roles are for you. Now, what I would invite you to consider when you're doing this exercise is to think about whether or not anything that you're choosing for yourself might set you up in a state of conflict. So, for example, if you pick as a goal or an objective at work in your role as a lawyer, somebody who is always there for their client, and you've also picked someone who is always there for their children, then you might find that there is a conflict there, because there will be times when your client's going to want you and your child is going to want you. So you might start to think about how you could phrase those objectives in a way that allows you to be in less conflict. So it may be that you choose presence as your objective. So regardless of what space you're in, you are 100% present with the person that you are with. So when I think about my children, for example, I know there have been times where physically I'm in the same room as them, but mentally I'm somewhere else. Usually it happens if something is upsetting or if I'm planning for a big event, then I will have my mind, which is maybe not exactly present with my children. So I really try hard to be present with them when we are together, particularly around meal times or if we are having a conversation with each other. So you might think about how you could reframe your objective to make it something that is less in conflict. You may choose that one is going to take priority over the other, right? And depending on the stage that you're at in life, you might put work ahead of children, or you might put children ahead of work. That's going to be something that will be potentially situational, right? If you're in the middle of a trial, for example, there will be cases where you'll need to put work first. And you might have more globally that you want to be there for your kids. So for example, my kids are still school age, and the way we've set up our family is such that I work from home, and that allows me to be physically present in the event that one of the kids needs to be at home instead of at school one day, whether they're sick or something has happened or there's a professional day. So I just invite you to think about really intentionally, what are the things that you provide in each of your roles that creates most value? Now, I've mentioned this, I believe, on the podcast before. An issue that can come up with clients that I work with is sometimes the value proposition that they have offered in the past as an advocate, as a lawyer, is the ability to be available 24/7 and work around the clock. Now, this may work at certain stages of your life, but if it doesn't work with you at the stage that you're at, then you may want to consider what other types of value you can bring to your work. And if you're in an organization where that type of service is one of the defining characteristics that is required for you, then you might think about whether or not that's a role that you can and want to maintain, or if it makes sense to try something a little bit different for a period of time to see whether that helps you to align your work and your home life with less conflict. So the idea here finally is really just to define from within what it is that you want in each of those roles. Again, independent of what other people may want for you or what you see as valuable based on what society is offering you. So that's step one. Now, step two is to ask yourself how your role as a lawyer and how your role as a mother complement each other. The reason this is a really important question to ask yourself is that there are so many opportunities and so many times where you're going to see how they are in conflict with each other, right? I gave some examples already where your client wants you to respond to an email and your child wants you to feed them dinner. So you're trying to feed your child, but you are on your phone trying to type out an email and you're really feeling in conflict with the two things. Or maybe you've got a big project that's due at work, and so you're staying late at the office, and it means you're missing dinner with your kids, and you don't like that. You feel like you're in conflict. Or maybe you've had a really difficult morning with your child. You dropped them off at school or at daycare. They were really upset when you left them, and you get to the office, and you're sitting at your desk, and you're thinking to yourself, should I have done that? Are they okay? I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I was still there with them. And so physically you're present at the office, but mentally you're somewhere else. So there are many, many opportunities to find conflict between your role as a parent and your role as a lawyer. And what I'm inviting you to do is to flip that around and start to notice how those two roles can actually complement each other. And it's interesting when I look back on my career because I think of these things now as a coach. I see them through a certain lens. But my first introduction to this concept actually took place years ago when I was interviewing for jobs as a very young lawyer. And I remember interviewing with the managing partner of a very prestigious regional firm in Vancouver. And he told me, and I don't even know how we got onto the conversation, but he told me about how his wife was a professional. I can't remember if she was a lawyer, but I know she had a big job. And he told me that he actually thought that the fact that she had this big job made her a better mother. And the fact that she was a mother made her better at her job. And I mean, this is not to say that if you are not working in a big role, that this is somehow a reflection of the fact that you should be, right? Nor if you're listening and you're not a mother and you're thinking, well, should I be, or, is there something wrong? And absolutely not. I want to respect and acknowledge and celebrate the decisions that all of us make in our lives, whether that is a decision to never have children, whether it's a decision to have children and never practice law again, whether it is a decision to do both at whatever level you choose for yourself. There is no right or wrong. But the reason I mention this is because I was really impressed. And by that, I don't necessarily mean impressed as in, oh, wow. But as I think back on it, it was impressed on my mind that this was a possibility, that this was something that he saw in his wife. And so when I think about how your role of being a mother, your role as being a lawyer are complementary to each other, if you ask yourself the question, how do these roles support each other, you will actually start to come up with answers. And I have done this exercise myself many times, and I'm always surprised at what comes up. And so here are some ideas about how each of your roles may actually complement one another. So if you look at yourself from the perspective as a lawyer, right, you might think that being a parent, being a mother, increases your ability to be efficient. I know for myself, when I had children, it required me to use my time so much more effectively than I was using it before I had children, because I had a hard stop. I had very firm boundaries. I needed to pick them up from school. I needed to be there. And so I didn't have the choice. I could not waste time, as it were, at the office. It may increase your ability to set boundaries. So when you know that you've got to be at the daycare at a certain time, you must be disciplined in terms of how you manage your time and the limits that you may be putting on your work. It may also lead to substantive changes. I know for myself, when I had children, I started looking at my work from a different lens, and one where I started to really question for myself the level of engagement, fulfillment, and connection I felt to the work that I was doing. And for some of you, you may feel an enhanced sense of that relative to the work that you do. For others, you might find, you know what, this thing I was doing before I had kids was okay, but it's no longer really working with me. And you might find that because you are now having a higher cost to your time, that the work you do, you really want it to be fulfilling. You really want it to be meaningful. You may also find that you want to be a role model for your child, right? If you maybe weren't giving a huge ton of thought to the fulfillment or your values or whatever it was beforehand, that might be something that you now have a heightened awareness of because you're thinking of yourself as a role model for your child or children and what you would want for them. You may also have a greater perspective as a parent about the challenges that other parents are going through. It might help you relate better to your colleagues, your clients. It might even help you in terms of how you frame your work, right? If you're a family law lawyer, this would be directly relevant, but it might be relevant in other cases as well. It might also increase your ability to delegate to others. If you're the kind of person like me who likes to do everything herself, you might find that having children requires that you start to delegate responsibilities. And so you get better at doing that. Now, on the flip side, so you can see, right? You can see how these things actually work toward each other. As a parent, right? As a mother, what might you find is beneficial to you by also having this work that you do as a lawyer? And what you might find is that it creates an increased appreciation of the time that you spend with your children. So if you were with your children 24/7, you might find that you're not quite as maybe aware, or maybe you don't feel as connected to them as you would when you have the benefit of being at your work and then being at home. So it can help you appreciate it. It might also help you, right, and your ability to advocate effectively for your children. So this has come up a number of times for me. My professional work as a lawyer. Yes, I'm not a practicing lawyer anymore, but I practiced for years. I practiced in advocacy, and I know the ingredients of a good argument. I know how to set myself up to negotiate with the individuals who care for my children. I know how to fight if I have to, right? We had an incident that happened a few years back where the school board wanted to change the boundary settings, which would have had the result of my children being at different elementary schools. And this was just not cool. I did not like this idea at all. And I was amazed actually at how I kicked into litigator mode and put together a 12-page document about why this was not a good idea. And I attended every single meeting on the topic and was one of the noisiest people in the room. And I rallied and I got people involved. And this was something that I never really thought I had inside of me, but it came out because it affected my children. It affected me at a very profound level. And I was so grateful that I had the skills that I had as a lawyer. So you might find that your advocacy skills that you've developed at work are really effective skills for helping you navigate and advocate on behalf of your children. And I don't mean advocating necessarily in an aggressive or argumentative or way that is particularly challenging to others, but to give you the tools that you need to advocate in a way that makes the most sense for you, that aligns most with who you are and your values. And again, you might go back to that role that you define for yourself as a parent. How do you want to advocate on behalf of your children? What does that look like for you? So your professional work may also help you be an example to your children about how to be perseverant, how to do hard things. I love my daughter's quite good at cheering me on. Not that it's her job to do that, but every once in a while she'll say something like, way to go, mom. Like, I know that was really tough. And, and I share that with her. I I share with her that I want her to see me doing hard things because it's an example of being able to do something that is difficult and doesn't seem doable. And yet if you keep at it long enough, then you can do it too. And so by showing to your children that, life isn't always necessarily easy, right? The challenges that you have are real. And it doesn't mean that it has gone wrong. It doesn't mean that you can't overcome them. You get to be that role model for your children. There are obvious financial benefits of your professional work, right? When you go to work and you make the money make money. It might be that there's more money, but you're making money that is used to support your family's lifestyle. You are putting a roof over their head. You're putting food on the table. You're putting clothes on their back. You're offering opportunities, whether it's camps or lessons or certain schools that you send them to. You are contributing financially. And yes, it goes without saying, but we can acknowledge how that plays a huge role in the lives that they lead. It gives them that sense of stability and security that they know that they can rely on the family having a steady source of revenue, that they're not worried about that. And finally, one last benefit that I think you demonstrate to your children, or that is a benefit to you as a result of having that lawyer role that you play. Not that it's a game, I'm making it sound so light, but the fact that you're engaged in professional work also signals to your children that there is more in your life than them. And I mean this in the kindest way. And my mom taught me this lesson. She is a dancer. She loves going and dancing. She's got all these dancing clubs that she's in, and she's always out at a different dance place every night. And she has said to me before that one of the reasons she thinks that this is important is that she needs to have a life of her own, a life that is independent of me and my brothers. And the reason is that it takes the pressure off of me to need to be entertaining her or providing her with some level of entertainment. Well, maybe not entertainment, but support, etc. So when you think about it that way, right? We want to be there for our children 100% of the time, right? We want to support them. And I think we also want to show them that it's okay for them to go out and live their own life. We want them going to the equivalent of their dancing lessons. We don't want them to feel like they can't do it, that they have to be there for us all of the time. So that's another benefit that can come from having a professional work. So we've outlined a number of ways in which being a parent and being a lawyer are actually complementary to each other. This is a real ongoing discussion in my mind. I work from home and my kids are here, and I often think, oh, this is in conflict. I'm here, I'm trying to work, and my kids are here. And yet what I also see from that is that constant push up against each other, or that pushing up against each other of my professional work and my role as a parent, has actually required that I be really strategic in how I run my practice and really strategic in how I parent. And so you can see how the two, by being, some would say in conflict with each other, but how them rubbing up against each other actually leads to improvements and enhancements as opposed to being something that is negative, right? And so what we're doing here is we're just wanting to ask ourselves and to see and to notice how they're actually complementary. And the more you run that tape in your head, the more you're going to see how these roles are complementary, and that will then push out some of the ways in which those roles seem to be in conflict. Now, the next step, so that was step 2. The next step is step 3, and that is to give yourself something to work toward, to create a vision of what you're working toward. Now, the word balance is the one that's probably most often thrown around, this idea of work-life balance. So you don't need to do balance in the sense of 50-50, right? If you think of the scales of justice and the weights on each scale are equal and that scale is flat all of the time, that's one way to think about balance. To me, that's not a very realistic way of looking at balance. I like to look at balance, if that's the word that I'm using, as balance overall, right? Each day might be unbalanced. One day might be mostly work. The next day might be mostly kids. One day might feel great. One day might feel really stressful. one day you might get a lot of self-care in there. The next day you might get no self-care. You can also look week to week. You may have ebbs and flows. In fact, I'm guessing you do have ebbs and flows in your practice. So those really busy periods followed by the really quiet periods. You may have years that are like that. And so when I think about the notion of balance, I invite you to think about it not in a day-to-day, but overall, is the big picture in balance for you? And it doesn't have to be 50-50. Now, I'd also like to invite the idea that multitasking is a myth, right? This idea that you can be balancing all things at once is not really doable, right? When they look at multitasking, what's actually happening in your brain is that you're switching back from task to task really quickly. Now, for some things, yes, you can multitask. I can wash dishes and listen to a podcast and do both perfectly fine. But if I try to organize my office papers and listen to a podcast, I can't do it because my brain is required for both of those functions. So when it comes to you and your family, this idea of multitasking isn't necessarily going to create balance in your life. It's more likely going to create, well, I don't even know what I would describe that as, but it's not ideal. So you want to have a life where overall you feel balanced. Now, balance doesn't need to be your word. There are many other words you can use to describe what you're aiming toward. Some people like the term work-life integration. I recently heard the word harmony. I like that one as well. For you, the word might be juggling. Now, I don't love the word juggling because I'm terrible at juggling. I don't think I've ever even managed to juggle. But if you are someone who knows how to juggle, if you're like the Cirque du Soleil performers and you've got it down pat, you might feel like a juggle is effortless, that it's fun, that it's a way of solving problems as they come to you. You might also like the concept of organized chaos, right? The stage you're at in, it's pretty crazy and that's fine, right? I know what's going on and that's great. So personalize it. Think of whatever your objective is and define it for yourself. And then the other part of defining what you're working toward is identifying what you're not working toward. So here I invite you to let go of all the unnecessary expectations that don't fit in with the roles that you've picked for yourself, right? You've defined yourself at work, you've defined yourself at home, and you don't need to go and put a bunch of additional pressures on yourself. So for example, if you have identified yourself as a problem solver at work, you might think about the problems that you're actually choosing to solve at work, right? Pick the thorny legal problems that require your best brain. Don't worry so much about when the social event is going to take place or where you should put the new coffee maker, right? You get to decide on where you're going to be focusing your energy and attention. If you've picked a role at home where you are nurturing, you're a really good listener, you are supporting your children in some other way, you may not have home decor as one of your roles that you're going to play, right? You may not be a Martha Stewart. I know that I am certainly not a Martha Stewart. And what that means is that I'm willing to not have the picture perfect home in exchange for a tighter connection with my kids, right? I'm choosing to be with them. I'm choosing to meal prep for them. That to me is important. Those are things that I'm going to prioritize over things that are less important for me. Not to say that I don't love the look of a beautifully kept home. I do, but that's just something that I'm letting go for now. So for you, what are you going to let go? That's step 3, is to define what you're working toward and define what you are going to not work toward. You're going to give yourself permission to just let those things go. And actually, before we move on, I'd also invite you to think about, in that realm of letting things go, sometimes it's also just putting things off to some point in the future. So again, if you're looking at your career and you're planning for your career, there may be times where you need to slow that down a little bit because of what's happening on the home front. And what you might find also is that as things free up on the home front, that you're able to commit a little bit more at work. So you get to decide what that ebb and flow is going to look like, and you get to decide how you're going to pace yourself. Now, the fourth and final step is to be kind to yourself first. So whenever it is that you are looking at this balance, this notion of peace, this notion of letting go of this conflict between your different roles, I invite you to be kind to yourself, right? When you beat yourself up, when you judge yourself, when you tell yourself you're not doing a very good job, what you're doing is you're creating an internal conflict, and that is the opposite of peace. It also doesn't help you solve problems. It just simply adds to the exhaustion by adding mental exhaustion of you judging yourself, feeling badly about what it is that you're doing. So the biggest gift is to choose to be kind to yourself. So if you're at home, how can you be kind to yourself? Well, I'd invite you to avoid getting into situations that are hard, right? And by this, I'm thinking about some arguments that you could avoid, whether it's with your kid, whether it's with your partner. So you might notice with your children that they're doing something and you don't particularly like it and you want to step in. But when you ask yourself if it really needs your intervention, the answer might be no, right? If you've had children for more than a day, chances are you've already learned to pick your battles, right? And that's what we're doing consciously, right? It's going to be okay if your if your children leave their socks on the floor and you could get into an argument over it or not. You might simply choose to not have the argument. You might leave the socks on the floor. You might pick them up and take them to the laundry basket without saying anything. You get to choose when you're going to have arguments and when you're not going to have them. You might also decide that if you do choose to go ahead and have the argument, maybe you don't feel all that great about yourself after the fact, to not judge yourself for that, to let that go and to say, you know what, maybe that wasn't the best thing that I could have done in that situation, but I made that decision based on the best brain I had at the time. Or, you know what, I'm doing the best that I can. Overall, I'm doing a great job. I can go and apologize if I need to, but instead of beating yourself up over something that has happened in the past, I invite you to forgive yourself and to move forward. I invite you to get the help and support you need, even if it means asking for help or asking for what you need. And that may feel uncomfortable to you, especially if you're used to being the person who gets things done on her own. And finally, I would invite you to take time for yourself. So even though you know that there's no shortage of work to do at work, there's no shortage at home, that you could always be doing something, to expressly choose that sometimes you're just not going to do those things. You're going to take time for yourself. Now at work, when it comes to being kind to yourself, again, please learn to not judge yourself. If something goes sideways on a file, if you make a typo in an email, if you have a file that just isn't going very well, or you have a discussion with a client where you feel like you didn't explain a concept very well, or maybe you had a difficult conversation with somebody that you work with, maybe you had an awkward exchange with opposing counsel. There's all sorts of opportunities at work for you to look at what you're doing and find the faults in what you've just done, and then to pick on yourself for having done it. And what I invite you to do here is to simply let that go. Again, you may learn from your mistakes. You may learn from things that go sideways. However, please try to do that without having an extensive space in between where you're being really hard on yourself. You're doing the best that you can, and let that be enough. I would allow yourself to set the boundaries that you need to set. I would allow yourself to pick the pace that most is necessary for you. I invite you to surround yourself with supportive people, even if that means leaving an environment that you're in right now. If you're in an environment that you feel is toxic, if you feel like it's an environment where you will never succeed because of what is valued in your organization, then maybe it's time to start looking at something different for yourself. And finally, I'd invite you to always give yourself the benefit of the doubt. So this kind of goes back to that first point of not beating yourself up. And a really lovely way to do that is to tell yourself it makes sense that. So for example, if you make a typo on an email that you're sending out, you might say to yourself, it makes sense that I would have made that typo. I've got 5 other files that I've been working on. I rushed through it a little bit because I know what else is on my plate. I didn't sleep very well last night because my daughter was up and I was tending to her. So the sentence or the phrase, it makes sense that, can be a really nice way to talk to yourself and to give yourself the compassion that you need when something doesn't go exactly to plan. So just to summarize, the 4 suggestions that I have then for finding greater balance, for creating balance, for finding more peace are, number 1, to define the roles that you set for yourself. So you are the one who sets out what is important to you as a mother and what is important to you as a lawyer. Number 2 is to ask yourself and highlight what makes you better in each role because you're in each of them, as opposed to focusing on how those 2 roles may be in conflict. Number 3 is to create a vision of what you're working toward and make that vision realistic. Give it a name. Is it balance? Is it integration? Is it some other thing? But let it be something that actually makes sense to you based on the stage of your career, based on the stage of your children. Let that be something that you work toward, and then you'll be able to evaluate whether or not you're aligned with that. And then finally, step 4 is to be kind to yourself. Now, the reason that this is going to work, again, going back to the purpose of all of this, which is to create more balance, to create more peace, is that when you define that goal from within yourself, you will be able to reach it. These are relatively simple shifts in mindset that help you define who you are. And from there, you get to approach your role both as a mother and as a lawyer. So I'd invite you to think about this as setting the GPS, right? You are doing that internal work to identify the destination internally. That way you know how you need to proceed in order to arrive there. Once you do that, the balance that you're seeking will start to feel, right? You'll start to achieve that balance, and you'll also be able to start with where you have the greater sense of control, which is within yourself. So the idea there is that by being intentional, by setting yourself up, by choosing to see where things are in harmony, by being kind to yourself, you are relieving that conflict, right? If you go back to that idea of Kelly McGonigal, and the stress is caused by the conflict between two things that you really care about, here you're looking at how they are less in conflict and more congruent with each other. So that may relieve some of that stress that you're feeling. And also by delineating your roles in each, you may see how just by defining what matters most to you, you may be able to remove some of the conflict at that level as well. The skills that you'll need in order to do this are, number one, to get really clear about what matters to you. And this might shift over time, right? I know for myself, it certainly has shifted over time. You might need to let go of society's stereotypes of what a perfect mother is and what a perfect lawyer is. So you can look all around you at mothers on Pinterest and lawyers on LinkedIn who are setting the world on fire, and you might compare yourself to them and think, I'm not where I should be doing more, I should be doing X, Y, Z, and you're simply not doing those things. And so part of this exercise might be to simply let go of those expectations for yourself. It also may require you to be willing to leave environments and relationships that feel unsupportive of you and your goals. Now, this can work in different ways, right? You might look at your objectives as a lawyer, and maybe the issue is that the environment that you're in requires that you be available 24/7, and that simply is not an option in your life right now. And so you need to alter where it is that you practice. It might also be that you have a really ambitious path for yourself in your professional work, and you're not getting those opportunities where you are currently. So you may need to do that. You may need to find a place where you're going to be able to pursue your interests. So whether or not you have children, these are questions that I invite you to be asking yourself, right? Are you in the right environment relative to the goals that you have for your practice? And at home, it also means thinking about what is most important to you and making sure that you're able to find support that you need, and also to let go of certain expectations for yourself and potentially for others. And it also will require you to say yes to certain things and to say no to others. And what you'll find is when you define who you are at the self-concept level, at that core level, when you focus on what's working instead of where there's conflict, when you get clear about where it is that you want to go, and when you remove that judgment, what will happen is you will feel more at peace and you will feel more balanced. You'll start to notice more where you're winning as a lawyer and as a mom, and you'll start to see yourself as the superhero that you are, whether you're in your most powerful professional attire, killing it at work, right? Or whether you're at home in your pajamas, reading a story to your kids as you put them to bed. In either role, you'll be able to see just how much you are doing, how amazing you are. Going back to what I started with, my dear, dear friend, you are doing a great job. You will also find that you are more at peace because you know that whether you're working on drafting that really complicated agreement or putting the finishing touches on your argument, or if you're at home wiping the tears off your kids' cheeks, that wherever you are absolutely in the right place. So I wish you all a very, very happy Mother's Day. Thank you so much for joining me here this week. It really is a blessing to be able to connect with you. And I am so in awe of all of my mom lawyers. I'm in awe of all of my lawyers. And today we are really celebrating my mom lawyers. And thank you for all that you do. I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge what you're doing. And I just want you to know you are supported, you are appreciated, and you are acknowledged. So with that, I wish you a beautiful week and I look forward to connecting again soon. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.